Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to allow 1 minute to get our live stream set up. Oh, the webinar's live stream now. Okay, still 1 more minute so that everyone may join, and we'll start shortly. Thank you. Hello. Okay, now let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's event, live from the studio with Bernard Leibov. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Fauni Barra, and I'm the Public Programs and Residency Coordinator here at BoxoPROJECTS. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, to whom we are deeply grateful to undertake our work here. As well, we would like to thank North Vancouver Rec and Culture, BC Arts Council, as well as the Friday Foundation for their support of the residency program. We have a few housekeeping notes before the presentation today. So if you would like to see live captions displays for today's presentation, you can enable this by selecting the CC live transcription button at the bottom of your screen. Please note that not all names will be accurate, but we hope they can capture most of the conversation. We're also recording this webinar, and it will be published with revised captions at a later date. We will publish it in our digital archive, where you can find not only this recording, but also past public programs, which include Artist Talk, exhibition tours, and more. My colleague had just placed a link on the chat for you to check out for our digital archive. And then I will also say that if you're experiencing any technical issues today, you can also head to our Facebook page where we are live streaming. If you're there, feel free to give us a follow. And lastly, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'll make sure that there is a Q&A component to the presentation at the end of Bernard's. So if at any point through the presentation you have a question for Bernard, please feel free to use the Q&A dialog box, which is also at the bottom of your screen. And you can also, if you want, you can raise your virtual hand. Just know that if you choose to do that, your voice will be recorded and it will become part of the digital archive. So just a heads up. And yeah, without further ado, I would like to introduce our August curator in residence, Bernard Leibov. Bernard Leibov is the founder and director of BoxoPROJECTS, a residency and programming initiative based in Joshua Tree in California. He is also co-founder and co-director of the Joshua Treenial. Prior to moving to California, Bernard was deputy director of the Judd Foundation in New York and Marfa. He also curated a non-traditional gallery space in New York City, which featured artists from Joshua Tree and other non-urban areas. And now we'll hear from him. Bernard, please join us.
Thank you very much, Fone. And I'd also like to thank Lisa Baldassara and the Friday Foundation for this opportunity, and Annika and the rest of the staff. It's wonderful to be here. And I've started my time here by studio visits with Marion Landry and Jae Woo Kang, and I'm very happy to be sharing the open studio with them tomorrow, and then have a slew of artist meetings set up for next week. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be here and to be getting to know the local arts community. Thank you as well for this opportunity to present my activities in Joshua Tree to you, or our activities in Joshua Tree, better said, known as BoxoPROJECTS. So I'll just begin my presentation. So yeah, as Fone said, BoxoPROJECTS is a residency and programming initiative based in Joshua Tree, California. It really found its roots during my time at Judd Foundation. I was lucky to be able to continue some activities I had going back and forth to Joshua Tree and bringing artists to attention in New York City. So I had a non-traditional gallery space operated out of my apartment called Box Office. And as I said, in my trips to Joshua Tree, I first went out there for an event called High Desert Test Sites, and really fell in love with the place and the community, and met a lot of artists, some of whom I thought should be seen on a wider platform. And I started bringing their work to New York City, starting in 2009. So we see a show here by Tina Bluefield of paintings. Working in a non-traditional space was also great because I got to show some somewhat provocative work. This is work by an artist called Randy Palumbo, who's a good friend with a presence both in Joshua Tree and in New York City, and now actually in Marfa as well. And Randy at this time was making work about the fetishization of consumer culture. And what you're seeing here are crystal pieces, blown and cast crystal pieces. The space really became, quite well known, and we were able to generate some good exposure for the artists, and even some sales, which was nice. And it also became a place to discuss issues outside of the New York art scene, which was a bit of a relief in some ways. So I was lucky in 2011 to be able to acquire this property in Joshua Tree. The property was a foreclosure, so there was, I guess, an unfortunate aspect in that way. Fortunate for me and for the art activities going forward. So I acquired the property in late 2011 and moved to Joshua Tree right at the end of the year and commenced the residency at the very beginning of 2012. And the interest in the residency program was really in the power of art to shape communities. The website is BoxoPROJECTS.com, and you can see a longer mission statement there and statement of purpose. But through my time at Judd, and also during my time visiting Joshua Tree, I'd seen the profound effect that art can have in shaping, the economy and the cultural landscape of a place, as well as providing real opportunities for artists outside of the commercial centers, and was very keen to get that going in Joshua Tree. It seems a little bit quaint now, but at that time, Joshua Tree was not that well known beyond its place with the U2 album, and it was also not that visited. Today, it's become one of those over-visited places, and so I hope the residency isn't making too much of a contribution to that, but it certainly has been part of the development of the cultural landscape in Joshua Tree. So just to look at some of the basic resources available, there is a studio. It's a 500 square foot, 50 square foot meter studio located in a former garage that's converted. This is artist Megan Evans, who came from Australia and actually has done 2 separate residencies. But one of the real joys is watching the studio morph each time. as a different artist inhabits it. This is Tom Houskin, an oil painter who was there this year, and he came from Yakima, Washington. The residency, one of the aspects of the residency is it's invitational residency, and that began because I was, for the first few years, I was actually sharing the house with the resident, but then in 2015 was lucky to be able to build some accommodations, which are pretty simple but effective. There's a full kitchen and bathroom and some general facility in addition to the studio. One of the other great things about Joshua Tree is the hugely supportive community. And we're very lucky to be supported by media sponsors who help us get the word out. So this is a local radio station that often features, well, they feature every activity we do. And they also have some discussions often with artists. This is artist Barbara Gotthard, who we will talk about a little bit down the road. There's also a digital radio station in Joshua Tree. And this is artist Eliza Kentridge from the UK being interviewed for that radio station. At the end of every residency, there's an open studio so that the artists can meet the community and present their ideas. Sometimes this takes the form, as you can see here, of a complete exhibition, but it doesn't need to be. Sometimes it's a reading or a performance or a discussion. But again, this is a shared resource. This is an ability for the artists to share their ideas and to get feedback and interaction with the community, and also, another cultural opportunity for the community to come to. One of the fun resources we have on property is this sculpture bench by a New York artist called Steve Taylor. And it's become a little bit of a focal point at each of the open studios, but it's also sometimes used by local musicians who will come and play here, or I've had some people who've come just to meditate in front of the rocks. So these are some of the great resources that we enjoy and that artists enjoy when they come to the residency. So the residency is, it's an invitational residency, as I mentioned. It's also a project-based residency. So artists are asked to propose projects based on the site, the environment, or the community. And the idea behind that is that artists working with site in one way, but working with the environment or the community in other ways, establish some strong ties with the place. So there's no prescribed content for the project, but there's always this thread of Joshua Tree and the laboratory that is in Joshua Tree, continuing through all, the work and the stories that come out of the residency and the place. So in the case of the environment or the community, the artist is paired up with experts or community members who can work with them, on their project, and those relationships survive their time in Joshua Tree. In terms of the site project, obviously, the mark is left on the site, as with Steve's sculpture that you saw before, or here. This was the very first residency. This is an artist named Gosia Wloreczak. Gosia is originally from Poland, but based in Australia and very, very well known there. She has an intense drawing practice, as you can see, and she draws only what she sees, and most importantly, draws pretty much only in performance. She doesn't have a studio practice. And she does these series of drawings called frost drawings, which she makes on glass all over the world. Usually they're wiped, but this was an opportunity to have a long-term installation of a frost drawing. And Gosia came and executed this over a weekend. There were 3-4 hour drawing sessions. And this has become a really iconic representation of the residency. As you can see, here you have community people gathered inside, for dialogue against the backdrop, of the drawings. And then Gojek actually came back in 2017 for a 5th anniversary residency where she made us tunics and drew on those tunics, capturing the interactions between people, first at the Palm Springs Art Fair, and then up again in the studio. This is wall work that she made where people came into the studio and she captured the conversations that she was having with various people, when they came. Turning to the environmental aspect, this is a project called Tree of Pain by an artist called Sean Scaberland. So with the research-based approach to the residencies, residents are offered the opportunity to come and do shorter residencies for a couple of weeks, say, do research, go away and develop their ideas, and then come back and do an installation. And here, we see an installation that looks at the situation of the Joshua tree at its most, at its first reading. And I should mention that these Joshua trees were actually secured with a local land trust that I work with. They were borrowed from their land. They were dead already, and they were returned to their prior sites. But in looking at environmental work, we're particularly interested in showing work and promoting work that makes new connections or proposes action that one can take. There's a lot of work being made about, simple environmental awareness, but we feel at this point that we're beyond the awareness phase with environmental and climate change, and would like to see artists proposing more action items. So at the time that Sean did this installation, the Joshua tree was up or was beginning to be studied for protection by the federal authorities in the USA. Unfortunately, this year that was actually declined after many years of research, but California luckily stepped in and has created protected status for the tree, and Sean was part of advocating that people get involved in that process. The other aspect of this work that was particularly interesting was that it also made the connection between environmental change and migration, and I guess what some people have been terming illegal immigration into the US. So Sean is from Flagstaff, Arizona, and he was actually, he is involved with groups that go down to the border and leave water and blankets for people crossing through the desert. Again, a call to action that he was making in terms of the human effect and the ways that we can get involved with the human effects of the environment and environmental change. The community aspect of the residency. So we're not referring directly to sort of community art, but we're very interested in artists working with different aspects of the community and telling some of the sort of lesser exposed stories that underlie the community dynamics in the Joshua Tree area. So Joshua Tree is a very small, unincorporated place, but it is part of a larger basin called the Morongo Basin, which has two cities in it. One of them is 29 Palms, which is also the home of the largest Marine Corps base in the world, and a place where live armaments training is undertaken before the Marines deploy. So an artist called Jennifer Karate is just wrapping up a long-term project called Soldier Stories, where she has interviewed primarily veterans and gotten them to entrust her with stories of things that occurred to them on deployment, which continue to affect them in their everyday lives. So Jennifer's very careful not to use sort of PTSD. She's not a qualified clinician. She doesn't use that as a term or address it directly, but she ensures that all the soldiers that she works with, or all the military personnel that she works with, have been or are actively in therapy. So they entrust her with a story, and then she ultimately devises a photographic image where she works with the military person to create that photograph. It's recreated in their domestic setting with their friends and families as witnesses, to address the sense of not being understood and not understanding the experiences of war. So in 2014, the Palm Springs Museum came across Jennifer's work, and they wanted to commission a piece because of the heavy military presence in the region, and invited me to get involved. They commissioned a residency and commissioned her to make the work. I was lucky enough at that time to have a connection with the base through my involvement in the local Chamber of Commerce. And Jennifer had never worked with active military before, never thought that the military would actually want to connect with her project, but they did. And by the time she came to Joshua Tree, sorry, I'm just going to move forward. I'm going to come back to this image. There were active Marines willing to work with her. And this is a Marine called Kyle Weejum, who was an ordnance expert who had been part of an explosion, luckily not hurt, but an explosion in Iraq. And he was triggered going forward by flash photography. And so Jennifer here was conducting some tests before undertaking the actual work to make sure that he wasn't going to get triggered in the process. And you can see her working here on the property behind the studio. Ultimately, this is the work that was created with Kyle's friends, as witnesses. And this piece is now part of the Palm Springs art collection. And at the end of this residency, they then gave her a solo residency. Jennifer's work is printed 4 foot square so that people can really enter into the situation. And it's also made with a medium format camera, so there's no digital involved at all, no retouching. Sorry, I did want to share this image just to say that not all of the stories are negative. That this is a soldier who was attempting to conceive and was not able to conceive, and eventually enlisted and went to Iraq. And while on deployment, came across a woman who'd had a cesarean that had gotten infected, and she was brought into a field hospital with her baby and treated and returned to health. And when the soldier came back to the USA, she was actually able to conceive. And this is her mother, and her daughter. Jennifer also based each of her photographs on classical paintings. And I think you can see the Madonna child influence here. So moving forward, the community focus of the residency really has been our primary focus since 2019. And we've been, as I said, interested in exploring and connecting with the less connected parts of the Joshua Tree history and community. So here actually is a Canadian artist, Eli Hurtle from Victoria, who came to look at issues of indigeneity, or to share his story of kind of reconnecting with his Indigenous background. And Eli came to Joshua Tree and worked on the constellations. He beaded the night sky constellations, but got into some very lively discussions with people about the local Indigenous situation and ways to move forward in cohabitation. We also partner with the Palm Springs Art Museum so that artists are able to present there and take part in public programs. And here is Eli presenting one of his films on Indigenous language revitalization at the Palm Springs Art Museum. This is a choreographer named Ana Sanchez Coburg. She's on the left, on the lower row. Ana came to Joshua Tree and worked with the local Latin community. 25% of our community is Latin and generally underrepresented in cultural expression in the area. And Anna came and worked with the women to share their stories through movement and video. And they also made memory boxes, each of them a memory with items from their past or things that reminded them of the past. And then Anna did a performance in the National Park, another place where we have a partnership, where she was able to share the stories. And some of the women were actually able to participate in a final presentation back at BoxoPROJECTS. And then lastly, in this regard, there's an artist, Barbara Gotthard. So unusually, Barbara is actually located in Palm Springs, which is only an hour away from Joshua Tree. But she was really enjoying, what we were doing. And she had a project where she wanted to explore the histories of 23 African-American families that had come to the Mojave Desert to homestead back in 1910. And this was a previously unknown history she'd come across and wanted to help sort of get the word out about. So Barbara came and did a residency in the studio. You can see her here presenting in the studio. This was during COVID. We had some small studio tours instead of larger events. But her project eventually went on to the San Bernardino County Museum, where she was able to present it and did a lot of public speaking as well. And it was also presented at the Palm Springs Art Museum, not the exhibition, but her public speaking program, where she also received a congressional award of recognition, which was incredibly well-deserved and fantastic for her. So turning to the Joshua Treenial, the Treenial is something that emerged through a visit from a co-curator, well, another curator and a friend of mine, Cage Beiser, who is located in Los Angeles. And Cage came and we were thinking about something we could do together, and we decided to launch this exhibition. It's not a triennial and it's not a biennial. It occurs when the timing is good. And it's an opportunity to highlight everything that Joshua Tree inspires and makes possible. And it's meant to sort of get beyond the immediate BoxoPROJECTS activity, although it does highlight an exhibition there. But we also invite cultural partners to co-program with us and enliven the whole region with a theme for a particular period of time. So the Joshua Treenial launched in 2015. There have been 3 editions to date, 2015, 17, and 19. But just to prove we're not a biennial, the next one will be this year after a 4-year gap. So one of the things that distinguishes the Treenial is that 12 to 15 artists are invited to create installations on the land, on the BoxoPROJECTS land, so that we create an atmosphere where people come together with the artists and with each other and create community for a period of time. There are performances and talks and different things like that. This is a chapel that was constructed by Gregory Michael Hernandez in 2017, where discussions were had. At that time, the NEA funding was under threat, and there were requiems and discussions around arts funding and the possible death of public arts funding in the USA. There's certainly a dearth, but we were hoping to avoid the death. This is an iconic piece from 2019. This is an artist called Eily Schmeltz, who's a local artist. So 50% of the artists are local and 50 are national, with a few being international. Eily created this piece called the Disc Portal, which was an installation meant to create this portal through the rocks. It went viral and was picked up by the Atlanta Public Art Commission, who created a portal in Atlanta. And so there's now this connection through the landscape to Atlanta. We were also lucky enough to have the initial wooden piece replaced through funding by this steel piece that will now be there long term. There are also performances that happen. This is a cultural partner, Aaron Shepard, who came on property, but he does more intricate performances back on his property as well each year, following the theme. And the rocks each year on the opening night, the rocks at the back of the property are used as a projection installation. And these are projections done by an artist called Jesse Gilbert, also back in 2017. We're very lucky that a local icon, the Integratron, I can't get into the background of that now. I'm running a little bit late on time, but Integratron is a very legendary place in Joshua Tree, the plans for which were transmitted by aliens to a local resident. But it's an acoustically perfect space, and we're lucky to be able to go into it each year for the Integratron and do performances there. So this was a performance by an artist called Kyle Simon, where he was bringing the night sky. He was actually playing the night sky inside the Integratron. And then that was from 2017. This was back in 2015, a group of artists performing inside the space and using ping pong balls to create the sound of rain. So some of the local partners, as I mentioned, this is an artist called Diane Best, who each year makes a film programmed along the theme. And sometimes the films are performed to live music. And then again, Aaron does his stuff each year. And this year we're being joined, well, I'll talk about that in a second, sorry. Another aspect of the Joshua Treenial is that we teamed up with a local land trust to launch guidelines for artists working on the land. This is both to educate them when they first come and look on their site so that they can create their installations with knowledge. And then there's also a leave no trace approach. And this has now become sort of part of the local curriculum for other art innovations and art endeavors. So one of the great things about the Treenial, it brings a lot of community regionally to the place. It's a great asset for people of every age, and is one of the few opportunities for people to see professionally curated exhibitions in the local environment. This year, we'll be opening the Joshua Treenial on November 11th, and it'll be running for 2 weekends with some programming during the week as well. The theme is a-territorial, given that this is a time at which so many lines seem to be drawn in the sand, and so much dispute over territories, both intellectual and physical. We're asking artists to propose ways of seeing beyond territory and the binary and returning us to ideas of wholeness and fluidity. We have 15 artists involved and 8 cultural partners, some of whom are other local institutions. And what's increasingly happening now with the Treenial as well is we're bringing residency artists back to create larger exhibitions and installations connected to their original research. And this year, 2 of them will be coming. One of them is Jenny Yu, I think another well-known Canadian artist coming from Ottawa. So thank you very much for this time. I'd really welcome any questions that there may be. And thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for that presentation. I was expecting to be surprised, but this I don't know, exceeded all expectations for me, and how thoughtful you are in working multidisciplinarity to approach like Joshua Tree with like a co-caring, nurturing, and programming. It is really interesting to hear how through BoxoPROJECTS and the Treenial, which I really love, you outlined that it happens when the time is good, as opposed to like having this pressure of producing on a timeline. And it's just so lovely to hear how you're located at the intersection of local community and other art organizations. And one question while we wait for folks in attendance to write their questions using the Q&A dialog box right below. is I would really love to ask you, like, what, how do you how do you center or decenter yourself when you work with local artists? Like, how do you see your role shifting when you invite like the communities that are, you know, different that what you would like usually, you know, like work with in New York? I know you've been in different places, and since you work so locally and bringing community together, how is that work internally for you?
I think one of the things I really had to learn, and it was a matter of unlearning some of the sort of New York attitude, was to listen to people and to really own up to the things I don't know and the experiences I haven't had. And so when, you know, working with local community, working, you know, particularly with people from different cultural backgrounds, but certainly even locational backgrounds, is, you know, doing a lot of asking and, you know, not being shy of looking a bit naive, and then using that learning to structure an approach that's, you know, co-created in many ways.
Thank you. And before we started the webinar, we were talking about planting some questions. So I'm gonna use that because I think it can potentially expand on what you already shared. So we have contemporary art at the New Frontier. Can you expand on that?
Sure, you know, before working at Judd, I was a brand strategist. So there's always this kind of search for the tagline and trying to really succinctly express what, you know, what you're up to. And I think particularly when I first left New York, and even when I was in New York with the artists that I showed, I was very interested in people making art outside of commercial centers and making, you know, art they really wanted to make and not being bound by ideas of the market or getting into galleries and things like that. And I considered that in one way, you know, a new frontier. In other ways, and this was pointed out, you know, by somebody else as well, and I'm sorry, I can't attribute it right now, but it has been written about. You know, the development of the West was a very frontier, you know, attitude that drew people and you know, right across the country till they got to the coast. And there was this sense that, you know, the frontier had been conquered. But in many ways, the frontier has now started moving. We think of it as moving eastward again. And certainly as it comes into the desert and other rural areas, where we're finding that culture is playing a new role. And people are able to have very interesting discussions and, you know, really get deeply, again, into things because they haven't been so explored or resources are more available. And I think COVID has even accelerated that move of artists and culture into more rural places. And I think we consider that now the new frontier as well.
Is there, thinking in terms of frontier and just knowing where geographically Joshua Tree is located, is there anything that sparks conversation within your local community? Especially, I was very interested when you mentioned the movement artist. I noted here, was it Anna Sanchez, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the conversations that piece sparked? Just, I don't know, it just came to mind when you mentioned A New Frontier.
Yeah, well, you know, conversation was really, again, about recontextualizing some of the stories, you know, of immigrants, particularly the Latin immigrants. Amongst the 11 women were people, you know, who came across the desert and had some really harrowing, but also life-affirming stories, and to really appreciate, you know, how they've established their lives and community, you know, in the local area, and also very much to highlight their contributions, you know, to the community and this active exchange. And I think a lot of the discussion has been about kind of that lack of interaction and how we can increase cultural interaction, you know, in the region. Joshua Tree is not the most culturally diverse place, like many rural areas, and particularly with a community of that size. You know, we really are working to keep the conversation going about having, you know, more interaction.
Yeah, and grabbing onto that frontier reflection, now you're in Vancouver, which is also very close to another frontier, like another like geographically where we are located. There's still this conversation of like how can we expand, from local to like a more like national or even international audience. I know you mentioned that a lot of the artists, it's like a 50-50 with like local and national, and few are international. And now that you're in Vancouver and you're like there's a space in between where you are located to where you are now, is there any reflections that is sparked from like being in the different cultural places of now? And is there anything you will take from what you see in the Canadian landscape or even the Vancouver landscape back to Joshua Tree?
Well, certainly. I mean, I know I've kind of put a particular lens on it, and you and Lisa have been very generous, but particularly the influence of local Indigenous cultures on the art scene here, the recognition and participation is much higher than in Southern California, and something I've actually been trying to work on for years. I did host a discussion with local contemporary artists, Indigenous contemporary artists on this topic. And it was quite sort of eyebrow raising or eye-opening, in terms of the traumatic effect of the history in California. And it's really great to see, the repair here. The other thing that's very different here is the cultural support that you get from your various government sources and ways to leverage that and have people, work and really thoughtfully develop work before it goes out for exhibition, and developing artists. So with the Barbara Gotthard project, it was the first time I was actually able to raise funds, grant funds from the California Arts Council for a local artist. And I am increasingly trying to use this approach with residents, of encouraging them, because American residents often don't think about this, but of going looking for grants so that they can actually be paid to come do the residency. And certainly in working with Canadian artists, that's something, we're doing. And then there's just this great vibrancy here. There just seems to be such a healthy attitude and as I said, this diversity and embrace of different cultures is a great thing to be part of for this period and to take back.
Yeah, and you mentioned even like how there's a land trust, and whenever folks occupy like the space for their projects, there's like a creating with knowledge, like there's an educational component to that.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people, talk about, there's been a lot of negative press about the effects of the public on the Joshua Tree National Park, for instance, and a lot of finger pointing. But I think really our experience has been that once you educate people, they're very careful. We really haven't had, problems. And also the education, I learned from the land trust, because it's not really my approach, but it's learned to be my approach, of them not telling people what they can't do, but just really pointing out the local habitat and the effects of certain actions on that habitat. And as soon as people understand, they make the connections themselves. They really don't need to be told what to do. And it's nice that this reading the landscape curriculum has been adopted even by large efforts like Desert X, which people may have heard of, which is a large biennial of art down in the Palm Springs, Coachella Valley. They've taken on reading the landscape as well, which is a really wonderful development.
Yeah, and to me, this speaks to the openness in which you approach BoxoPROJECTS projects. Just, like careful listening and co-programming, which seems very hopeful for a future where, that I think you're already proposing through the triennial and being ad territorial. You said something wonderful about how you're moving away from, like this finger pointing and more into like a wholesome and like fluid, outcome or like outlook, of what the intersection of where you're at looks like. Can you expand on that and how, like, this maybe perhaps there's a connection between like the reading the landscape and the educating and creating with knowledge to this triennial?
Well, thank you. I mean, I hadn't made that connection myself, but I see it. And I think in general, for this Treenial, but also the residencies going forward, even the artists, that I'm meeting here and looking forward to meeting in the coming week, we at the Treenial, we at BoxoPROJECTS, because I do have other people involved, in it as well. And myself, as an individual, as a curator, I'm really interested in art these days that show us art and artists that show us new ways of seeing and being. I think we really understand that we've worn out the old ways, and we've worn out Enlightenment, we've worn out the Renaissance, and artists have always been very adept. There's an artist that I work with in several ways in Joshua Tree who's embedded in the national park. Her name is Rebecca Lowry, and she attends all their meetings and then makes suggestions when they come up against challenges. And I'd like the residency, the Treenial, to be the launching pad of more of that, that kind of effort, where artists are better integrated into society in terms of problem solving, which they're so adept at.
They're so wonderful. I wish I could, and maybe I will look into it when you say that we have worn the Renaissance. I think you're great with taglines. Like we're gonna need a merch line now. Lastly, as I see folks are rather listening than posing questions, I would love to ask you, what is the future of Joshua Tree? What is the future of BoxoPROJECTS? Is this something that is like interdependent on changing the ways, integrating the reading the landscape methodologies, and like continue the outreach? Or is this something that you will continue to replicate or continue nurture, like even if you move away from that place?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, Joshua Tree is a real laboratory, as I mentioned, sort of in a side way. We're next to the military base on one side. On the other side is a fundamentalist Christian city. We have a Buddhist temple, a monastery. We have a huge UFO presence, people who interact with UFOs and have strong beliefs around that. There's a big permaculture movement. I'm missing a whole bunch of things, but the national park itself. So it's a real laboratory where people can come and learn. And I've learned a lot there, and I'd like to think that in going somewhere else, I would take that learning with me and have a new lens, on how to move forward. I think the future for Joshua Tree is really at question right now. It's one of the places that's been greatly affected by vacation rentals and the inability of authorities to really foresee the effects of vacation rentals. It's becoming a very unaffordable place, and a lot of resource extraction with new construction going on there that doesn't make sense for the place. But luckily the economy is sort of taking care of that, a little bit. And I think everything finds its own balance. Ultimately, Joshua Tree is an unincorporated place, for better or for worse. So we have no way of directly influencing policy. And so we do it through our actions. And I think that's, one of the important things for me and for us. And I think that's come into the residency as well. Sort of, that it's a very cliche thing, but being the change you'd like to see is a really important thing that I think is applicable, in Joshua Tree, but everywhere.
Yeah, and I can see now like the importance of community integration and activation, especially in a place that is unincorporated. And I'm very thankful for the way you share and the way you intersect all this like eclectic communities into co-creating, into like showing ways of being and seeing. And I really love what you said also about like projects that invite action, because we are beyond the awareness phase.
Yeah, very much so. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to present to a new audience, but also to be here, learning from the local environment, the local artists, and the residency itself.
Thank you. And yeah, for folks who are in attendance and happen to be in Vancouver tomorrow, Bernard, along with artist in residence, Marian Landry and Jay Wu Kang, will have an open studio at Griffin Art Projects. My colleague will drop a link on the chat box where you all can see more details about it. But yeah, the curator will be in. If you want to come chat with Bernard, highly recommend. I know I will be there. I would love to keep chatting with you, Bernard. And thank you so much for today's presentation. We're very lucky to have you here. And is there any goodbyes you want to say before I wrap it up?
No, I think just as I said, I'm very grateful for this opportunity and for this audience, and I look forward to tomorrow and the coming week. So thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, so my colleague has dropped the link there. I hope to see you here tomorrow if you're around. But if not, please join us for the last day tomorrow of our per diem exhibition. We're open noon to 5 p.m. We're also going to have a book launch that relates to this exhibition with remarks by collectors Brentman and David Birdsall. Also at noon, we'll have some refreshments for you. And lastly, I will just say that if you want to know more about Griffin Art Projects, you can subscribe to the newsletter at the bottom of our website, which my colleague will also link in there for you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I hope you have a nice Saturday. Goodbye.